Well, the Liberals may not have gotten the reset they were looking for this week. Their cabinet retreat in Montreal began with announcements aimed at affordability and the middle class, but one caucus member calling for a leadership review and a highly anticipated ruling on the Emergencies Act kind of blew apart that narrative a bit. It all quickened the pulse of politics ahead of Parliament's return on Monday, so we're going to bring in our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP, and Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Happy Friday, gang. How you all doing?
Happy Friday.
Fred, that montage of pictures we had there, that your pick, I don't know if it's a play of the week, misplay of the week, depends on which side of the aisle you're sitting on, but it was Ken McDonald.
Ken is the gift that keeps on giving to the Conservatives. He says incredibly aggressive things against his own government. Now, going into an election, Pierre Poilievre is going to go out there and attack the Liberals. We're going to have Conservative candidates attack the Liberals. You're going to have Canadians go out and say why the Liberals are not should not be re-elected in various forms. But we actually have a sitting Liberal member of Parliament constantly giving us amazing quotes that we can use. The one he said on your show last October, probably the most useful and the most powerful, and we're going to see that in ads, where he said people are losing faith in the Liberal Party. This is a sitting Liberal member of Parliament saying this, and he keeps doing it. It's 3 times now. Like, we're going to see more or not?
I get the feeling this may be the last time. I know he wants to run provincially, I think, with the Liberals, and I don't think the provincial Newfoundland and Labrador Liberals are happy with this either. Greg, I'm going to get you in a second, but Mel, in terms of attack ads, like there's the stuff you said about the Prime Minister being hated, but like all governments have their best before dates, and we have hit ours. Like that is withering in terms of Oppo.
Totally. And to your point, we keep seeing him say stuff that is really reflective of. I know he may think he's insulated from what the government's doing, but he is part of that government. Mm-hmm. And whether or not it hurts him electorally in the riding, it will hurt the team that he's on. And it's very rare that you sometimes see it. I saw in the lead up to 2019 with the NDP, when you're taking shots at yourself, the other team doesn't need to take shots at you when you're just kind of saying what they could use and they can use against you in the lead up to the next election. And I don't think folks watching at home see that as your house is in order, you're all working towards the same direction. They kind of see it as messy, and I don't think that they like that. So more of that is not good, especially on a week that they were trying to press reset. And here's our new narrative. Here's what we're saying going forward. Between this and even, I would say, former Minister Lametti saying that he was resigning as a Liberal MP, I don't think that was the week that they were looking for this week.
Greg, I get a lot of pushback from Liberal partisans that we're all making too much out of what Ken McDonald had to say, and it's only one MP, and stop giving it so much oxygen and attention. But he was like the one MP who kind of helped precipitate what became the carve-out on the carbon tax because of his vocal criticism and all these sorts of things. I know there's a lot of other pressure. How serious and significant do you think this was?
If the polls were not where they were, I'm not sure it would be getting the coverage that it is. I can think of, every party has had someone who has crossed the floor or quit or flamed out at the leader. The Liberals 20 years ago, very, a bit of a civil war that had some lasting implications. Fred said it's a gift for the Conservatives. I remember when they were not happy about the gift when he supposedly gave them the finger.
He was scratching his face.
But at this point, he's kind of diluted the effectiveness of it. And it seems like somebody who's kind of thirsty for attention. When we first spoke about it the first time, I was contacted right after by someone who's in the know in Newfoundland. Besides yourself, there's 2 of you. And they said, he's probably going to run provincially. This is probably not helping him. At first, he seemed strong. Now it just kind of seems like a one-trick pony. And there's one lesson of politics that I've always tried to remember is don't embarrass your constituents. And at this point, this is kind of all he's known for. If you are going to run provincially, time to move along.
But I think, too, one of the issues is he embarrasses caucus colleagues. Like, never mind the PMO. Like, I got a lot of outrage from just regular backbenchers. What the hell are you guys putting in the water out there in Newfoundland? Are you surprised he's still in caucus based on what happened this week?
I'm not surprised that he's in caucus because it's not just the minority equation. You make it a bigger story.
Right.
He's lost his effectiveness. My guess is that he has heard from his caucus colleagues to the point that Mel made. This was a week about trying to, the Liberals are leaning in on a bunch of different areas. And there's a ton of his caucus colleagues who are working on that, trying to turn the ship around. And all he's doing is the easiest thing possible. And then he seemed to have stepped on a rake, and then even the delay, David, you probably heard the same thing I did. I heard Tuesday night that this was coming on Wednesday, and then on Wednesday afternoon I heard that there was a statement coming from Ken McDonald.
I know. We spent 2 hours waiting for the statement during the show, and it never came until after midnight.
Some reporters got it Wednesday night, and then everybody else. So he also stretched it out to a 2-day story, which to me is a bit unforgivable.
So Fred, are you surprised he's still in caucus? I mean, Greg makes a good point that if you kick him out, you martyr him, and you make it a bigger deal. He did a retraction and said, I support the Prime Minister, and let's just forget about all the other things I had to say.
What he said in October, I think he should have got tossed from caucus. That was a blatant attack against his own party in a very aggressive way. And it's showing that if they didn't do it then, what his attacks now would not be as impactful. Greg says he's losing his effectiveness. I can't wait to see what he says next week.
It's like you're waiting for the new season to drop on Netflix. Mel, just to close the loop on this, you mentioned that you dealt with this in the 2019 campaign. Is that Pierre Nantel? Am I remembering the name?
Oh gosh, we had a few. Pierre Nantel, we had a few. I won't name, current ministers who also maybe threw some elbows when they probably shouldn't have. We're now provincial ministers elsewhere, but
right. So how do you deal with that internally as a party when you've got someone in the caucus questioning your leader like that?
It's hard, and to your point, when the polls are low, it's hard to be able to say, we are going to win the next one, and if we win the next one, well, you're not going to have a good role. When things are going bad, it's hard to kind of corral people together. But I think being able to say to folks, if you continue to do this, A, you're not a team player, you're hurting everybody else on this team, but 2, you're just not going to help us win. This isn't going to be helpful in turning the tides around, but sometimes politicians are in it a little bit more for their own kind of personal brand and their name, and they sometimes lose sight of that. So I think we may be seeing that, and to your point, I agree. It should have been, out of caucus back in October, because now you're kind of too late when he continues to do this.
No, I mean, if you don't deal with problems early, they can turn into much bigger problems sometimes. Okay, Mel, let's go with your pick for this week. What's the issue you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, everybody's looking forward to the session coming back next week. Well, maybe not looking forward. We're trying to see what's going to happen. Maybe we're not excited about it. That's maybe a better way to say it. But looking at the different caucus retreats that are happening this week, the Conservatives are having the retreat this weekend. And what I liked about the NDP's caucus retreat is they started planting what comes next in their agreement with the Liberals and what they're asking the Liberals to do next that will have a concrete impact on people's lives. We've talked a lot about pharmacare on the show and about how it's legislation and how it won't necessarily impact people for a long time down the road. But what I liked is the markers of, okay, what medicines are you starting to cover now? So, will you be covering insulin, which is something that impacts a lot of people in Canada? Will you be covering this medication? So I think the ability to already put the government on record, but also signal that, we've still got some gas in the tank here and we're still getting them to show up and to do stuff for people in a concrete way on the medications. I thought that was a good play.
So Greg, we had David Thurton on the show last night who was covering the NDP in Edmonton, and he cited a senior NDP source saying, look, the government's going to move on coverage certain drugs before all the pharmacares. I mean, and maybe like having a shorter list of highly visible drugs might be a better political play for them. I don't know, but what's your sense on that there's going to be tangible movement on pharmacare before even the framework is all done, maybe?
There has to be movement in order to keep New Democrats who may have questions about the supply and confidence deal. You have to see some sort of movement on that. The other thing, I'd be cynical and say, for the Liberals, you want too much movement. You don't want that to end too soon if you really want to keep governing until 2025 and the hope that the economy improves and your numbers will improve. I think what we're seeing reflected as well is something that we talked about when we were talking about climate change and how in times of good economics, people see it as, yes, we can do this. And when it's tough, it turns into something nice to have. You see the comments from the health minister, Mark Holland, about how, we have to be aware of the, the financial circumstances that we're in at the time. So I think they're trying to find that line where they're able to do something. There are still questions, even the story that CBC has on this, you have two different experts, one saying that, most people are covered on a lot of this stuff. You have other people saying that, no, there are people that are, financially at risk that really could use the benefit of lower cost drugs.
Right, and there is the big challenge, kind of what Jagmeet Singh puts on the table. Province has got to get on board with that, and jurisdiction does matter in Canada, and that's going to be a challenge. But Fred, if they do make movement on this to the point that, hey, diabetes drugs are going to be completely covered for everybody, how does that collide with the Conservatives and the cost-cutting sort of narrative that Pierre Poilievre is pushing to rein in the costly Liberal NDP coalition?
Well, that's the funny thing about this whole agreement. There's no actual money tied to any of this. They're all talking about what could be in legislation and what could go into the act, but there's no money tied to it.
Once you start covering some drugs, right? If you move fast on it, then that's cash.
That's another parliament. That's another time. There's actually implementing it a different time after this. And as Jagmeet Singh was quoted in the story saying, dealing with the Liberals is like dealing with slimy eels, which is a fascinating
coated
thing
in
to
oil,
say.
I think is what he said about them.
Fascinating thing to say.
So
to
tasty.
I've not heard him say that expression before.
I'm not sure how he knows what that's like, but it was a colorful one.
It was, and it shows, I think, at the same time too, how it is potentially still a fragile deal here, and. This is a minority parliament, and we are at that time when minority parliaments traditionally collapse. So even though they have this agreement, we could go to the polls sooner than we think.
Yeah, possibly. Now, Greg, I know you kind of wanted to criticize the media with your pick, so we're out of time. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. What did you want to highlight this week?
So the Tucker Carlson speech has been litigated a lot of different ways, including your previous panel. But one of the things I noticed in the earliest coverage, and this is major news organizations, they had a lot of what Tucker Carlson said. A lot of it was egregious. But, I looked at 4 different filed stories from the original take of the speech, and they didn't mention his anti-LGBTQ comment, where he made a comment about the Prime Minister being in the closet as if it was a derogatory thing. Mm-hmm. And I think the media needs to kind of step back ahead of the election, and as we see American style come in. I mean, this is literally a guy who got fired from Fox News who came in to say this, and your first take was to ignore that. Basically, what he said was, if you're gay, I can insult you about that. And I often, you talk about Twitter, I see people, trying to feminize male politicians, because I guess the implication then is if I'm calling you a woman, that's also an insult. You're lesser than. And so this is going to be tough. I've wanted to talk about the media for a while without seeming like I'm blaming the ref for my own team. But this was one where,
I'm going to bring a whistle next week.
Yeah, but this was one when I watched the first coverage, the majority of the major news organizations, it wasn't until Faye Johnstone tweeted that part of the speech that people kind of woke up on social media. And then, the resulting coverage, you did cover it on this panel. I want to be clear about that. But the actual news stories that were filed left it out, and I think that's troubling.
Yeah, and look, I know there were some issues about access and who could get in and how much of it they could see and what they could record. But, it is an interesting point, Fred, that there is something happening out there with a segment of the population where homophobic comments like the one that Tucker Carlson made are just kind of popping up at these big events, and there is a fringe that's growing and moving more to the center of the conversation. And I'm kind of with Greg. I don't know if my profession is ready or fully grasps what actually is happening in some segments of the voter pool.
Well, look, there's obviously a lot of stuff that happens in this country that's not always covered. And I think I'd put this, we could all blame the media, which I don't always agree with.
Big boy.
I don't think it's the media's fault in this, and I hate to come across as a partisan here. It's the Liberals' failure in communicating. If they felt that this was an attack like you do, like you felt like there was an opportunity to go after Tucker, the Liberals should have been able to put out a coherent message that you could write stories about.
Well, they came out hard the next day. They had 4 ministers out.
I used the word coherent.
Okay.
They had 4 ministers talk over themselves, almost arguing with themselves, where they were contradicting each other. Where one is saying one thing, and then the media questions, and the other one pipes in and says, no, that's going off another trail. The strategy, I think, for the Liberals was right. I don't think they executed it well at all. They need to communicate better. And if they were telling the story, if they felt this was a story that Canadians should know, they should have gone out and said it.
Fred, I'm going to push back on that, because in order for the Liberals to push back on it, they would have to know about it. And based on the initial coverage, no one knew that he had made this anti-LGBTQ crack. And I do think that's where the buck stops with the media. I agree with you plenty of times on the Liberals' inability to push back, but on this one, it needed to be reported first for people to be aware of it.
All right. Mel, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I agree with kind of both these guys today. Just the idea that a sitting premier brought somebody who just, kind of lied all the time and said damaging and dangerous stuff all the time, and then gave him a platform to say it here. And the coverage coming out of that, obviously, we need to see more emphasis on what was said, especially the dangerous comments. But I think there is a problem that we're seeing, especially with, you mentioned earlier, David, like the rise of this stuff that people here don't think that. People aren't, homophobic here in Canada. We're all loving, everybody's kind. And there's this rise of this, and it's almost like it's okay to say things, or people are given a platform to say those things that are quite harmful to a lot of people. And I think we're still learning, how do we cover that in a way that doesn't just continue to inflame those hateful comments, that doesn't continue to pit people against each other instead of saying, hey, actually, this isn't okay. So it'll be interesting to see how we do that. Interesting to see how the States does it in the next election, but also interesting to see how it happens here.
Well, it's a challenge, right? Because in the years from Trump, let's face it, he was an accelerant on this, and then everything from the pandemic, the Overton window, I don't know if it's shifted or shattered, quite frankly, in terms of what mainstream conversations can be about. But Fred, I know it's something we grapple with every day as a profession, because it's to the point now, if you even point out a fact, you're immediately attacked as being biased, right? So I don't know if it creates a form of self-censorship with a lot of reporters and a lot of newsrooms, but it's a challenging time when there's so much anger out there.
There's no question, and it's from all different angles, right? It's not just the right, it's the left. There's different things here. But again, to my point, and what I'm trying to make, is that the Liberals had an opportunity, and they didn't execute it well at all by sending 4 cabinet ministers out with different messages. If they felt that there was something there, and it was all over social media, that's how we did see it.
Yeah.
The Liberals could have sent someone out with a clear, concise message and delivered what they felt, and that would have generated stories from this. They failed to do that.
Yeah, last 10 seconds here.
I agree with Fred on that. The 4 cabinet ministers, I think that should have been split. There were 2 issues there: what was said about Guilbeault, what was said that was homophobic. And again, you've got 2 chances there to build that into a bigger story.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And it's just wild to see a guy getting platformed like this, given the track record that is there. We'll platform you guys to your credible track records. Greg McKecker, Melanie Riche, Fred Delory, thanks for being here every Friday. Appreciate it.